Hello everyone, and welcome to Whiskey Wednesday. Slightly different setup, and a slightly different video for you all this week. We are talking about Buffalo Trace, and not only are we going to run through the bourbon, the classic, we're going to be making some cocktails, which is a little bit different. Something we hope to do more of in the future, if all goes well, but we'll see what happens on this video, something which is not a bee in my bonnet, but something which I think is not seen or talked about a lot in the whiskey industry, is how good this stuff actually is. Now, you all know I'm a bourbon fan. You all know that I love George T. Staggs and William Larue Wellers and Eagle Rare and most of the stuff Buffalo Trace make. But this whiskey is quite personal to me. This is a whiskey which a good friend and I bonded over on a night, and our friendship grew stronger, and we had a wonderful night out. I met up with loads of other interesting people, so it holds quite dear to my heart. And I just don't think it's not mentioned in the same circles as things like Jim Beam or Jack Daniels, or maybe even things like early times. It might be outside of my circle of whiskey drinkers. Maybe I'm a little bit biased in what people talk about around me, but this is as good, and in theory should be as famous. I know Jack Daniels was like Frank Sinatra's whiskey, and was it Jim Beam had Sean Connery as one of their sponsors. Buffalo Trace haven't. I think they're one of the only brands which hasn't brought a celebrity in to help sponsor their whiskies. But here we are to talk about it. And it has quite an enriching history. I love American history, and this thing pretty much starts at the dawn of what is considered modern day America, so like post 1775 and 1776. So the land in which this distillery sits on, liquid was first distilled in there on 1775 or in 1775. And the name Buffalo Trace, it's not the distillery's original name. It's the current name it's had since 1999. But buffaloes used to roam through the wilderness in Kentucky and Tennessee, all throughout all of America. And it led to the distribution of Europeans and settlers throughout all of America. And those traces are called Buffalo Traces. And this one runs past the Kentucky River, which is where whiskey is still made to this day. 200 years in the making, the world's most awarded distillery from every facet and whiskey award giver you can imagine. And it's just something which I think should be talked about in a bigger, more welcomed manner. Not that it's unwelcome, it just doesn't seem to get into that conversation at all. Regarding its name and its history, the gentlemen who first distilled whiskey there in 1775, they obviously aren't with us anymore. Their names are documented, but sadly I've forgotten them. But a very famous name in 1812 set up the first distillery on the land we know today as the Buffalo Trace Distillery. He was Harrison Blanton, and he built the distillery in 1812. Things start to rumble on from that point. In 1870, a gentleman called Edmund H. Taylor bought the distillery, and he renamed it OFC, which was Old Fire Copper Distillery, which is what's the most expensive Buffalo Trace bottles now retail for. In 1878, it was sold to a gentleman called George T. Stagg, another famous name in the bourbon industry, more for the bottle, I suppose, than the man. They say it was sold to him. I'm pretty sure I've read that they had quite a tumultuous affair over that, and it was kind of stolen because Edmund H. Taylor tried to set up the Taylor Jr. Distillery, and I think Stagg sued him over that, just through certain copyrights, because he now owned the rights to that name. And then not much really changed for a long time. The distillery, in terms of digging back slightly, was called the George T. Stagg Distillery up until 1999. And after that point, it was called Buffalo Trace. So that's what we know it has now. There's some pretty cool facts regarding the distillery. They were one of only 8, I believe, to stay open during Prohibition to still make alcohol. I think Woodford was also part of that kind of collection too. They were distilleries which weren't bought up by people like George Remus to make whiskey for medicinal purposes and then to sell in ice cream parlours to the young people of America during the Volstead Act. And then amazingly, in 2016, during some renovation work, what was meant to be a visitor centre, which now is a visitor centre, they were digging up part of the distillery and they found one of the old vat units, I think which date back to 1873. Like the vats are still intact. The building they were based in burnt down in a fire. I think in like the 1880s, it was 1882. And they found that just by digging through the grounds, and that is now like a fully fledged visitor centre, a historical place to go through. So this distillery is literally drenched in American history and American folklore, as every bourbon distillery is, but something about Buffalo Trace just really stands out about it. The whiskey itself. This is a Kentucky Straight bourbon. It's roughly 6 years old, I believe. 40% ABV, available for around £20 a bottle. We will smell it, we will talk about it. We're not going to score it because this is more of like an educational video about the brand. And this distillery makes just a remarkable amount of liquid. And you can pretty much cover all of bourbon history just with this distillery. They have Kentucky Straight bourbons, they have bottled in bonds, they have single barrels. They obviously have the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection, whiskies ranging from 6 to 18 years old. The Pappy Van Winkle Collection, whiskies from 10 through to 23 years old. They've got 4 different mash bills. Mash bill 1, which is low rye, mash bill 2 is high rye, mash bill 3 is wheated, and mash bill 4 is an all rye, or a rye strong mash bill. So they can literally cover everything and go over every single act and important part of American whiskey history. And it's just not talked about enough, and I don't know why, so we're here to do it. This is mash bill number 1, and from this same mash bill comes most of the Taylor range, Eagle Rare 10, Stagg Jr., George T. Stagg, Benchmark Bourbon, quite a few products. The mash bill, regarding its contents, it's sub 10% rye from what I could find out. I think it's 5% malted barley and 85% corn, so it's a very corn heavy style, which allows for some of these beautiful smells that you get through this whiskey. There is something about every Buffalo Trace product which just has this rich kind of pear, apple, like pecan, maple syrup, dessert note just running through it. It's very layered. And for something that isn't particularly expensive, there's quite a bit of depth to it. It is sweet, there's not much spice, it is pretty mellow on the nose. But all those big caramel, apple, vanilla, clean citrus notes. It's not very lemony, you don't really smell a lot of rye. Just so welcoming, it's so comfortable. Let's taste it. Even though it's sub 10% rye, finish has got a little bit of fire to it. It's nutty, it's earthy, really mellow, like soft tobacco, almost like cigar spice. It's a perfect everyday sipping bourbon, and like for the price point, it is honestly so hard to beat. Whether you're buying it in a specialist, whether you're buying it in a supermarket, whether you're buying it online, it's just so utilitarian, but still so good in its own right as a product. So regarding its right as a product, we're about to make some cocktails. Now, I used to make cocktails, not for a living, but sort of for fun, and I've not made an old-fashioned in a very long time. But the first one is a little bit easier than that, so I'm going to move the whiskey out of the way. Keep the whiskey, move that whiskey out of the way, keep that bottle there. The first one is a very simple twist. In fact, it's not a twist, it's a very simple cocktail. It's essentially a highball, and you'll find most bourbon distilleries these days are doing something which mixes their spirit with ginger ale or soda water with lime and ice or lemon. So all we need for this is some ice. Luckily prepared, just to my lower side there. Just fill your glass with that. For any of you professional bartenders watching, I apologise for my varied use of barware. It's not something which is a typical staple at Whisky Wednesday headquarters. 50 ml of Buffalo Trace. Particular ginger ale we're using is Fever Tree, pretty on-trend style right now. Top it up. I'm going to use the bar spoon just to give that a little bit of a swizzle, just to make sure that it's all mixed up. But we also need a little bit of lime. So as I move this, you won't find many of the people who carry a penknife in a leather-bound little wallet. So slice line down the middle. This bar surface has been cleaned. I just want to reassure all of you of that. And something I want to do more of is just do the cocktail thing, because bourbon's great to sip as it is, but just to have something a bit lighter, a little bit fresher. I mean, it's currently, when we're filming this, it's the hottest day in Manchester. It's going to be even hotter tomorrow. So something like this, which is fresh, clean, and very approachable, is a great way for whiskey drinkers to enjoy a product slowly. And we've done some reviews recently of more affordable whiskies, which involve not having to think about it too much and just enjoying the experience of drinking something. And this ginger ale with Buffalo Trace and some lime brings out a little bit more of the rye note, allows you to just get that kind of the apple and pear thing a little bit more. It's crisp, it's fresh, it's delicious. That's actually one of my favorite drinks to drink at home, be it with Buffalo Trace or with the spirits. I like ginger ale, quite a fan of that. So it just allows you to make the drink a little bit longer, and you're not really going to lose out on drinking something ridiculously expensive. It's an affordable way to do it. So that's delicious. But the big old bourbon cocktail is the old fashioned. It has been a long time since I've made an old fashioned, so I apologize if any of the work is a little shoddy. So what you will need, and this is a little bit of a riff on Buffalo Trace's recipe, which is pretty like all over their Instagram page and stuff like that. With old fashions, your choice of like amount of ingredients, it's so personal. If you go to a bar, the bar's gonna have their own twist on it with house pours, but I'm not a fan of a really sweet old fashioned. I like less sugar syrup and I like to taste the bourbon more. So we're gonna need ice again. Let's get like a little bit in there. For any of you that are fans of like other cocktail shows, this isn't as fancy as like How to Drink and stuff like that, but it still works quite well. So for this, I'm gonna use 60 mils of Buffalo Trace. So that is a double, that's 50, plus another 10. We need some sugar. Now typically, if you have the time, use granulated sugar. If you can, use brown sugar. Just for the sake of this video not lasting forever, I don't want to sit here and be stirring something for 8 minutes and have the beating of it in your ears. So 60 mils of bourbon, I'm only going to use 15 mils of this. Just because again, I don't like it that sweet. I like it a little bit more laid back. So that is pretty much 15 mil. Straight into the container. And then the only other thing is bitters. You can have your own personal choice of bitters. Standard Angostura is pretty good. Buffalo Trace themselves recommend Pochards, or Pochards, which in itself, as a product, has numerous links to Buffalo Trace's past with the Sazerac Coffee House and Tom Handy's coffee bar. If you actually own a bottle of Sazerac 18, you'll see the coffee house on the front of it. And if you have a bottle of Tom H. Handy, you'll also see that little house on the front. Tom Handy actually helped Antoine Poichard invent the Sazerac cocktail, or indeed an American twist on said cocktail. Now all we want to do, from my experience anyway, is just stir this until you begin to get some condensation on the barware itself. You don't want to stir it too long because you will just over dilute it. So just having your forefinger and your thumb just on the side of it to measure how cool it's getting is the easiest way to do this. And obviously, again, I'll reiterate, you can use your own riff on the amount of sugar syrup you want. You can riff on how much bourbon you want to use. Maybe not go too much on the bourbon because that's just like a martini approach, a bit of an alcoholic's cocktail. But this is the simplistic way. But yeah, if you've got time at home, I would very highly recommend using granulated sugar, preferably Muscovado, something a bit darker, a bit deeper, just to allow you to get like the full experience of all this. I think that's enough. That's a pretty decent stir. Nice glass, brought this from home. Bit more ice. Strain. And then the tricky bit comes. Can we do it in one go? So you'll see there's a slight red tint in the liquid due to the Pochards. This is the tricky bit, right? Single peel on an orange. Hey, not bad. When you are doing this at home, it's not too intense that you don't get any pith on it. Pith is the kind of the whiter inner lining there. Not done a fantastic job here, but you don't want too much on it. Now, typically you'll do a little spritz over the top, just get those oils going, just so that before you even drink it, you're getting a good amount of flavor and taste. You can choose to fold this or just dip it into the side, Mad Men style. And indeed, just sip away. I think I've nailed that. Yeah, the 60ml, 15ml. It's not too sweet. And all that sugar syrup is doing is providing a little bit of sweetness and more of a texture, especially as we're stirring it down. So yeah, 60ml of bourbon, 15ml of syrup if you're choosing to use it, or just a longer stir if you're actually using granulated sugar. But yeah, Buffalo Trace. Utilitarian, tasty on its own, a great mixer. I've said on numerous times in different videos that you can choose to drink whiskey however you want in your house. It's your house, you legally own the bottle, do what you like with it, within the realms of the law. But just to sit at home and make something long, like either one of these drinks, or pull the highball back in there, it adds a different experience to the whiskey. And I'm expecting some people in the comments to be like, oh, you shouldn't mix anything. It's personal choice. The world is built up on personal choice, and variety is the spice of life. And these two cocktails, with this bourbon, a classic meets a classic meets a classic. And that's kind of what all this is about. I wanted to call the video Buffalo Trace, a story with 3 glasses. And it works quite well with that. And I think this in itself is the epitome of the modern whiskey drinker. You can choose to drink it neat, you can choose to make something long and refreshing and chilled, or with the use of Mad Men, and I'm pretty sure the Old Fashioned is the oldest ever cocktail, and certainly in terms of written down ingredients. So it in itself is an American classic, and with the influence of films like TV shows like Mad Men and numerous other things, this is just something which is in the modern eye, and it's taking whiskey drinkers' attention. You might be watching this video and you've never bought a bottle of Buffalo Trace. You might be brand new to the whiskey. You might be brand new to the whiskey world. This is a great way to do it. Cocktails shouldn't be scary. You should be able to make them at home, despite being in a very fancy bar. It shouldn't be something which should intimidate you, and neither should this stuff. And it's not. It's welcoming. The whiskey world is welcoming, and Buffalo Trace is a beautiful way to start off that adventure with yourself. So thank you for watching. One of our longer videos, this, but I look forward to the comments. If you like this style of video, we will be doing more, just because there's a lot of ground to cover. We won't be going into gin. I can make you secure of that. We won't be doing any gin cocktails or anything. That's had its time in the limelight. But yeah, thank you all for watching. I hope you try some of these at home. Tell me your thoughts on Buffalo Trace. Tell me your favorite in the range. Lord knows there's a lot. But yeah, thank you all for watching. This is Whiskey Wednesday. I'm Phil. This is Buffalo Trace, and we'll see you all next week. Cheers.